was a bountiful land, a land teeming with fresh water and mineral springs, and a great underground river, the Taze, left from the glaciers 40,000 years ago. A land carved in limestone cliffs, blanketed with rich soil, covered by forests so thick the Indians claimed that a bird could fly from Kentucky to Lake Erie without landing on the ground. The woods abounded with ducks and geese, wild turkeys, passenger pigeons, bear, deer, elk, and buffalo. It was here that the Native American came to settle, followed by pioneers, town builders, artisans, tradesmen, factory workers, and inventors. The story of Springfield and Clark County is their legacy, and it's part of your legacy too, for you also contribute to its unique history every day you work, shop, or play in this special place we call Springfield and Clark County. In the footsteps of the mastodon and along buffalo trails came the first inhabitants of this area, the Native American. Here, the prehistoric Indian hunted and gathered food as early as 3000 BC. These ancient people left dozens of burial mounds, like this one in Enon, the second largest conical mound in Ohio. During the French and Indian War, the Shawnee moved to the rich bottomlands of the Mad River. It was here that they built their villages of Pickaway and Kishpokatha. And it was here in 1768 that Tecumseh was born. The Shawnee was a powerful nation, much resistant to white settlement in the wilderness. And during the American Revolution, Shawnee warriors allied themselves with British troops to raid against the Kentucky settlements. In response to the raids, the settlers called upon 27-year-old George Rogers Clark to lead an expedition against Shawnee villages in the Mad River Valley. On August 8th of 1780, Clark and 1,000 troops engaged some 300 Indians in what has become known as the Battle of Pickaway. The Indian warriors and their families were driven from their homes along Mad River, never to settle there again. The battle was the largest military action of the American Revolution west of the Allegheny Mountains. It opened the door for settlement of this area by the early pioneers, and by 1796, several farms were established near the old Indian towns, and settlers planted crops, hunted, and fished the fertile valleys. Simon Kenton, a scout during the Battle of Pickaway, remembered the richness of the Mad River Valley and returned here from Kentucky with 12 families in 1799. They built a fort consisting of cabins and a blockhouse. This became the first permanent settlement in what is now Clark County. By 1801, one of Kenton's pioneer families, headed by James Demint, had moved further east on Buck Creek. There he built a house, purchased and surveyed land for a new settlement named Springfield because of the abundance of water in the area. He also established the first town square near the banks of Buck Creek. Another group of pioneers arrived in 1801, headed by Griffith Foos, who constructed a log house and opened the town's first business, a tavern. Demint soon built a grist mill and distillery, and roads were cleared to Yellow Springs, Dayton, and Franklinton, soon to be named Columbus. Within 4 years, the town had 11 cabins, a post office, its first schoolhouse, and Methodists were holding Sunday services in Foos Tavern. In 1818, Clark County was placed on the map and Springfield was named the county seat. Soon afterwards, the first county courthouse was constructed in the center of Springfield. Swift-moving rivers and streams throughout the county provided an abundant energy source. Water wheels powering all manner of mills began the town's industrial development. Gunpowder mills, grist mills for turning wheat into flour. Wool and linseed oil mills sprouted like rushes along the creeks and rivers. Attracted by the new industries came not only new settlers, but also skilled artisans and laborers, millwrights, and most of all, innovators. By the 1830s, Springfield had available to its residents wagon shops, tanneries, bakeries, hatters, shoemakers, tinsmiths, coppersmiths, blacksmiths, and carpenters. The town boasted of 94 private residences, 18 general stores, a printing house and post office, and several dozen mills. Springfield was ready, primed for an explosion of growth. And when America's Main Street, the national road connected with Springfield's Main Street, a boomtown was created. When the national road arrived in Springfield in 1832, it brought with it a flood of people. In some months during 1836, over 600 Conestoga wagons came into town, and many stayed in the area. Federal funds for construction of the road were non-existent for a decade, and Springfield became known as the town at the end of the pike. Weary travelers stopped for a time and pondered how to proceed. Many chose to settle here in Clark County, deciding not to go any further westward on what were no better than weedy wagon ruts. To accommodate travelers, scores of hotels were constructed along Main and High Streets, with names like Werden House, Buckeye House, National Hotel, Murray House, and the Pennsylvania House. They offered drink and meals for travelers and became centers for the community's social life. The stage yard surrounding one of these could park up to 2 acres of wagons, 500 horses, and thousands of cattle. Soon afterwards, the Mad River and Lake Erie and Little Miami railroads cut through town. In time, several trains and upwards of 100 stagecoaches per day brought passengers here. Businessmen turned towards the manufacture of carriages and wagons, and a Haymarket on Market Street experienced booming trade. Meanwhile, James Leffel was experimenting with ideas for water power. By 1841, he had constructed a 1/2 mile race along Buck Creek, powering 20 mill wheels in all. A cotton mill, 3 woolen mills, an oil mill, 2 flouring mills, 2 sawmills, and a score of foundries were built along the trace, the first industrial complex in the community. So effective was the power of water generated, businesses used steam only for transportation for many years to come. By the eve of the Civil War, Springfield had attracted a number of industrial entrepreneurs to the shores of Buck Creek. Phineas P. Mast and John H. Thomas started manufacturing cider presses and grain drills. William Whitley began making plows, and John Pitts manufactured his threshing machines here. The level of industry rose to the point where Springfield was primed to become an industrial giant. Sounds of band music echoed through the streets of Springfield in 1861. The Civil War had begun, and the city answered Lincoln's call for troops. Eventually, 3/4 of the eligible men in the county served in the war between the states. Those left at home formed soldiers' aid societies, making bandages, raising money, and packing relief packages for troops, sending them southward on the Little Miami Railroad. In April 1865, Springfield responded to the end of the war with parades, fireworks, and red, white, and blue bunting, only to change it just a few days later with black in grief over the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. During the war, local woolen mills prospered, making material for uniforms to be worn by Union soldiers. Linseed oil was also important to the Army, and area farmers responded by expanding their production of flax. Manufacturers of farm implements turned to the business of making forage wagons, but also continued to make machinery for the farmers who, because of the enlistment of their workers, needed more efficient machinery. In the years following the Civil War, Springfield's population had reached over 12,000, and by the heyday of the city, 1880, had surpassed 20,000. Demand for storerooms and homes was overwhelming. In 1868 alone, 250 new buildings were put up in the city. The interests of the great Springfield industrialists had grown during the war. Within 10 years of the war, the Foos Manufacturing Company was producing everything from engines to kitchenwares to clothes wringers. The P.P. Mast Company was busy making Buckeye grain drills, seeders, sowers, cultivators, and cider mills. Mast joined forces with the Foos brothers to form the Mast Foos Company, which made lawnmowers, pumps, wind engines, and ornamental iron fencing for sale across the globe. But the real success story of that era was William Whitley, creator of the Champion Reaper. You see, when the Civil War ended, Johnny didn't always come marching home again. Thousands of veterans and their families moved westward to claim rich farmlands in Kansas, Nebraska, and other plains states. New farms in the West created an urgent need for more equipment to plant, cultivate, and harvest. Whitley's companies could not by themselves keep up with that demand, so he and other businessmen combined to make farm implements. They formed the Champion Interests, plants that rivaled in size the great manufacturers of Europe. A score of other industries sprouted up as spin-offs of Champion Interests, like iron and steel firms. But the Champion Reaper was Springfield's prime moneymaker. In 1877, every day, 4 trains of 72 cars each left Springfield, carrying over 1,500 Champion machines to the west. Springfield was the largest industrial city in the Midwest, and the manufacture of farm implements reigned supreme. This era of expansion was not without its problems, however. Saloons and pool halls sprouted as fast as did the factory buildings, and with them came grumbling, fighting, and public drunkenness. Many factory workers would lose their paychecks in the taverns before ever reaching home. Eliza Stewart, a Springfield housewife, engaged the Ladies' Aid Society to assist her in picketing, and later closed bar rooms and saloons. Thousands attended her prohibition rallies. Mother Stewart became the first prohibitionist to reach national recognition in the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Convinced that his success would continue, William Whitley bought out his partners in the 1880s and constructed the East Street shops. This was the second largest factory in the world at that time. Only the Krupp Works in Germany was larger. But in June 1887, Whitley's empire collapsed. Speculation in futures, the buying and selling of goods not yet produced, created the greatest business disaster in Springfield to that date, called Blue Friday. Whitley had lost his entire fortune, over 2,000 workers lost their jobs, and the great East Street shops sat idle. Whitley became known as the entrepreneur who made and then broke Springfield. The other Champion interests survived, however. In fact, most factories remained unaffected by the East Street market failure. P.P. Mast, meanwhile, began publishing Farm and Fireside magazine from his plant on Main Street, and soon started Women's Home Companion, a magazine that attracted national circulation. The city continued to grow with modern amenities in evidence everywhere. There were streetcars, telephones, telegraphs, and electric power. Private and cultural amenities grew as well: theaters and opera houses, fine hotels and meeting halls, beautiful parks, a new hospital, and homes of Victorian splendor, all built with manufacturing dollars. Summertime of 1889, one of Springfield's peak years, this magnificent building was being completed. At its dedication the following year, it would become the second of 3 city halls flanking the city's main square. A testament to the community's golden age of prosperity, the hall would be 50 feet wide and an entire block long. Its placement along this large open space in the southern part of downtown Springfield was quite deliberate. Most of the city's development did not take place around the original town plat on the banks of Buck Creek. The arrival of the National Road had reoriented the city's pattern along an east-west corridor, bordered by Main and High Streets. It seemed only natural this area should become the hub of the city. Markets were already flourishing in the space when it became known as Market Square. Seasonal overflows of Mill Creek running through the square and a swamp along its banks caused townspeople to place it underground into a vaulted sewer. Soon, public and commercial buildings were placed atop the buried creek, first a building housing a market and city offices, then the Champion Reaper plant, the company that made Springfield the Champion City. By then, the Champion interests had moved to the East Street shops, and the original building was converted into a block-long enclosed arcade by owner Oliver S. Kelley. The arcade was one of the first of its kind in the United States, with shops, offices, and a hotel. It was an important gathering place for residents and visitors from all quarters and classes. It was only natural then that the Esplanade, as it was often called, became the focal point of the community's public activities. Over the years, it kept company with 2 hotels and 2 train stations. The Esplanade was host to a proliferation of parades, celebrations, street fairs, and open-air markets, and it was even the site for the State Republican Convention in 1885. On July 4th, 1889, a new fountain, donated to the city by Mayor O.S. Kelley, was also dedicated. Brass bands were playing, church bells ringing, and fireworks lit the evening sky. Over 50,000 people had gathered in the square to dedicate the 41-foot-high cast-iron fountain, second largest in the state. Designed and constructed by J.W. Fisk of New York at a cost of $6,000, the fountain was to become centerpiece for the Esplanade. Its name was changed from Market Square to Fountain Square, and Market Street became Fountain Avenue. It was decorated with realistic giant lions and classical statuary depicting Neptune overcoming an enormous sea dragon. Only 2 blocks away, a new library was in the works. A permanent post office and second courthouse had just opened downtown. So the county's population had reason to celebrate. Their community had gone from small businesses along the creeks and rivers to large, internationally famous manufacturing companies. Life in the Champion City, people believed, was superior to anywhere else and could only get better. The course of Springfield and Clark County's history seemed set. Everyone looked to the turn of the century with great expectations. The Esplanade, with its new fountain bordered in magnificent buildings, stood as symbols of the community's firm foothold on a prosperous future. And as its first century closed, Clark County and Springfield residents eagerly looked towards their next 100 years.